So this morning, we are doing another welcoming congregation service. Some of you may wonder sometimes why we do so many queer services. Um, but we are required in order to maintain our status to have at least 2 full services on LGBTQ related issues and at least 6 services where we mention our special days of remembrance or honor certain things. So today we are honoring a little bit of our queer history as well as honoring National Coming Out Day. All right, and now Beth has a reading for us from Tracie Crenshaw.
So Tracie had wanted to be here this morning, but she is a full-time student at Western Michigan, and it was midterms week. So I said that I would read her piece for her. She wrote this, well, she'll explain why she wrote this. Good morning. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Tracie Crenshaw. I'm a longtime buffer, but being a full-time student has pulled me in many different directions. I'm currently studying psychology at Western Michigan with a strong focus on behaviorism. I'm going to talk about spiritual implications of Florida House Bill 1557 today, referencing a research paper I wrote during my sociology course this past summer. By spiritual, I am referring to the individual journey towards awareness of self, the exploration of a belief beyond the self, and connection between both these voyages. Florida's House Bill 1557 states that parents have rights over education of their children in regards to sexual orientation and gender identity. Children of all ages struggle with their identities during development, as defined and normalized by society. So removing education about sexual orientation and gender can be very detrimental to their well-being and healthy brain development, as well as it is an attack on democracy. Under the bill, a student will no longer have confidentiality when disclosing sexual orientation and gender identity. Specifically, Senator Dennis Baxley filed an amendment to the bill that would have obligated schools to tell parents when a child comes out as LGBTQ+ to an educator, but ended up withdrawing the amendment after backlash on social media. However, the wording of the original bill, as in the case of a 2021 Florida critical race theory bill, is still vague enough to prompt worry among educators and can still be interpreted as the student no longer having confidentiality. Governor DeSantis proposed the bill in 2021 to stop critical race theory being taught in schools. However, critical race theory is misunderstood as systemic racism, when Merriam-Webster defines it as a group of concepts, such as the idea that race is sociological rather than biological, used for examining the relationship between race and laws and legal institutions of a country, and especially the United States. Critical race theory is actually a legal movement, which challenges both the substance and style of conventional legal scholarship. Because of the obscure wording of the Florida bill banning critical race theory, schools removed any literature from curriculum and bookshelves that could potentially be considered critical race theory in order to avoid litigation from the law. Similar preemptive measures that were made with House Bill 1557. The view of those who support the bill favoring the protective rights of parents. The Florida government has spoken that parents should have a say. Other GOP lawmakers contend that topics such as sexual orientation and gender identity are sensitive and should be approached by parents, not the educational system. Those supporting the bill believe the fundamental rights of parents to oversee their children's upbringing is in their hands. However, those opposing it avow that the fundamental right of children is being threatened. I believe that the rights of children are more precarious and should be protected more than adults, as children's brains can't make adult decisions yet. Children are an oppressed group, and therefore their rights outside of the home are more important because they can be oppressed by the adults in their lives, especially the rights to privacy. Young people are exposed to many forms of emotional and physical abuse, deprivation, indoctrination, coercion, and validation by adults and adult institutions. According to Time magazine, this bill goes too far in protecting parental rights and is part of a larger movement of advocacy groups such as the Parental Rights Foundation and Moms for Liberty. The aim of the movement is to control what books are accessible for students, as well as the content of the curriculum, and effectively censor the resources students have access to. Censorship is a violation of the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and threatens freedom of speech not only in the U.S. but across the globe. Stripping away rights for children who identify as LGBTQ has so many consequences. For example, the bill ultimately sends the message that identifying as LGBTQ is inherently wrong, stigmatizing and marginalizing children who may realize their difference at a young age. This leads to social isolation and stigma that can be traumatizing for the spirit as well as the development of the child. Variations in romantic and sexual attraction are, according to extensive psychological research, normal variations of human sexuality. Let's be certain here that sexual orientation isn't just about sex. It's also about emotional, intellectual, romantic, and spiritual attraction to other people. It's about relationships that are personal and fulfill human imperative needs for love, acceptance, and attachment that are known to be important for spiritual and emotional development, trust, and to feel safe. Child development experts such as Jean Piaget, and I don't know these names, and Lev Yudkowsky detail how identity develops in youth. Without going into too much detail, children affected by the bill are in a critical time period for development, and this includes spiritual development. Without access to education about variations of human sexuality and gender norms, the very development of identity and awareness are at risk. The bill directly affects LGBTQ youth in Florida, but more and more states are jumping on the bandwagon. Chasten Buttigieg, husband of Transportation Secretary, spoke out against the bill in a tweet saying, "It will kill kids." Suicide is the second leading cause of death among young people. LGBTQ plus young people are more than 4 times as likely to attempt suicide than heterosexual youth. According to research explored by the Trevor Project, youth that have little to no support in the form of a parent, teacher, or peers are at the highest risk for suicide. While the law may seem as appropriate for those whose values fundamentally align with conservative Christian ideals, in which the quintessential idea of heterosexual norms, cisnormativity, gender binarism, and gender roles denote traditional principles, the law is not appropriate for a number of reasons. It distinctly contradicts the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, as well as the first article of the Constitution of the State of Florida, Section 3. From a sociological vantage point, it can harm the mental and physical health of youth. As I previously mentioned, it can be stressful for young people's identities to be debated, rejected, and ignored. Extreme stress and feelings of isolation can lead to self-harm. In addition to the bill not being appropriate for Florida youth, taking the bill literally would be nearly impossible. The exact wording of part of the bill is prohibits classroom discussions about sexual orientation or gender identity, but this would be difficult to implement. For example, anytime a teacher calls a boy he or a girl she, comments on a girl's dress, or mentions her husband, that teacher would be violating the bill. These are accepted gender expressions, but still technically fall under gender identity. Florida House Bill 1557 is detrimental. Topics around sexual orientation and gender identity should be normalized, not banned in schools. The earlier children are exposed to gender and sexual orientation differences, the better they can develop a strong identity and sense of self. The Florida bill directly challenges this essential part of development. These topics should not be prohibited in the early years of school, but introduced in a general way, with later elementary years having more detailed education around sexual orientation and gender identity. While the bill is dangerous to LGBTQ plus youth, it is difficult to define and is imposing more state regulations under the guise of expanding parental rights. The bill also limits educational opportunities. It censors diversity by promoting indoctrination in a narrowly defined idea of normal, and it invalidates the identities of LGBTQ plus students.
Thank you, Beth, and thank you, Tracy, wherever you are. As queer people, we're required to have eyes in the back of our heads. Part of the exhausting and scary duality of being a queer American is while being out and living your life and pursuing your happiness, you are never at liberty to fully relax. You always have to be on your guard. As queer people, we have to develop a queer protective reflex. As we go out in the world, we come in contact with a variety of different races, different cultures, different beliefs. And we may have to put our queer guard up to navigate this world. There are many dangers that we have faced as individuals or as communities and continue to face. Most of us try not to dwell on some of these in order to feel secure and safe. In the environment I was raised, I learned to get my guard up early on. Not having a name for what I was, but knowing In a culture that I was in, anything different was looked on very negatively. And during my entire queer life, I very rarely let down my queer guard. Many people don't even know that I have one. I keep my guard not only to protect myself, but also to protect my family and my community. As a queer dad, I not only had to look out for myself, but for my child. I was always on guard, making sure that the daycare, schools, etc., would be a welcoming environment for our family. When we traveled, I looked at the laws in the states that we were going into, the type of people we'd be around, and would look for welcoming spaces for us to be, places where I could be comfortable being out. I first came out to a friend when I was 17. I was scared to death of losing them, but I did not. I practiced for many years on how to tell my family. And I remember when I came out to my sister first, she begged me never to tell the rest of the family, knowing that my life in the Adventist world would be hell. I broke that promise when I was about 25 and came out to my mother, and she just simply said, "This must be a joke, it can't be real, and we're never discussing it again." Although I'm out to most everyone I know, and I'm very comfortable with my coming out process, but my coming out process never ends. It's every day, sometimes many times a day, and each presents the difficult decision, often needing me to make a split-second decision as to what my safety, consequences, price, and the gain of this decision would be. Of course, as with any of us, keeping ourselves safe is paramount. As a queer person, you always need to be aware of where you are and who is around you. There are many encounters where I need to decide whether or not to reveal myself. This pause, this instant evaluation, guards and guides me through life, knowing when to come out and when not to, who to come out to and who not to come out to. There is no shame in staying safe, no matter how many advances our queer community continues to make. We can never let our guard down. I don't hold Rick's hand or kiss him in public unless I know the coast is clear enough. For us, holding hands or showing affection in public could be dangerous. We have to be conscious of what we are saying and who can hear us in any public space. My defenses are always up, but sometimes you have to calculate the risk. I remember when I was with Ray, who passed away many years ago. We were staying in Philadelphia in a hotel waiting for the birth of our daughter. One of the maids asked us why we were there. And of course, I hesitated immediately. Of course, Ray blurted out, "We're here waiting for our baby to be born." I was mortified, but it turned out to be positive. Um, while we were staying there, several of the maids would stop in daily to see how things were going. And then due to some legal complications with the Blackfoot Nation, we had to stay there for 2 weeks after she was born until she was cleared to go home. They would come every day, see how things were going, fuss over the baby, give us all this parental advice. I was very happy to have had that very pleasant surprise. I think my most uncomfortable time, though, coming out was when I had to apply for my daughter's Social Security number. I went to the South Bend Social Security office, Indiana's. We had to learn gay geography, so we knew where to go and where to be safe. Um, of course, I had to, bring the paperwork. So I was called back, and I handed the gentleman the paperwork, which was the first two things on the pile were her birth certificate and her adoption decree. The only thing he looked at was the birth certificate. And he looked at me and he said, "Something's wrong here." He said, "There's two men's names on this birth certificate, and that's not valid." And I said, he said, "There's nowhere in this country where there's birth certificates like that." And I pointed out to him that in the state of Pennsylvania, they don't list mother and father, they list parent one and parent two. I was parent one and Ray was parent two. He didn't accept the document. He dismissed me, and that was back in a time where I accepted the rules of straight man's America. I went home, called the adoption lawyer, and the adoption lawyer said, "Just keep going back." So I went back again, and guess who I got again? And guess who sent me back home? Time number three, I went, everything was done, and it was fine. Of course, today I would not accept being turned away. I would have raised a little bit of hell before, well, I would not have walked out of there without having that process. But that was back in the day where I accepted that this is how things are. Even though I am out, I need to decide in everyday situations where and when to come out. I have to come out to doctors, dentists, teachers, daycare staff, employees, and coworkers. I feel it's very important to be out in spaces where I need to be comfortable as me. In an ideal world, I would love to be unabashedly out at all times, but I have learned that I can't be and have to develop an intuition, a sense of safety and danger to know when the time is right and when it is not. I've resolved to be out in the world, especially in an environment where I know that I am maybe one of the only or very few queer people in the group. Places like here, at work, or in certain social groups. But I always assess my risk before acting, with the safety of myself, my family, and my community being my first consideration. There are times that no one knows that I'm queer. And many believe that not everyone needs to know that they are queer. I personally don't believe that. If the majority of time most people think that I'm straight, I would like to disabuse them from that idea. But passing if you can is why we have that choice. But passing as you can amounts to hiding in plain sight. My choice currently is not to hide. Not everyone in our community has that luxury. Some of the bravest among us cannot pass. With all the perceived reasons that someone is queer, so many of us are living in fear every day, and that makes my passing unacceptable. Staying silent has consequences to our hearts and our mental and emotional stability, to our queer self-esteem. We need to learn to balance our safety with a sturdy heart. We many times find ourselves in the minority in most situations we are in, so speaking up and speaking out will always have to be a conscious decision. It is not enough to let people assume what they want because they usually will assume that you are straight. Passing out, however, is not emotionally sustainable. Being safe enough to be out is a privilege as well as a responsibility. We never know the benefit it may be for someone to come in contact with a queer person. Our pride is not a day each year. It is not a rainbow flag, a bracelet, or a shirt. Pride is foremost our queer self-esteem. It is also our bond with everyone in the queer community everywhere. Pride is our unique way of letting people know that we are here, we belong in this world. If we can say that we are queer, we must not do so to make our own lives better, easier, more transparent, and authentic. We do so to clear the path for those of us who are not able to come out. For those people who live in places where freedom is not a given, or who do not feel safe in their own families, to make inroads in the straight world for them. Each time we come out, we send up a flare of hope and direction, showing the way.